Good morning, everyone. I have a few more slides than Jordi, so I won't be able to go in detail in each of them, but if there is anything that raises your interest, we can discuss a specific slide or a specific concept later during the discussion. But they are there for your use when you'll be able to download them in a couple of weeks' time, I think, from the agency website. So the pediatric regulation. The pediatric regulation has been in force for more than 5 years now. This is the legislation as published on the journal, and has as three objectives: to increase research, availability, and information on medicines for pediatric use, and research into medicines for children. Most importantly, these objectives have to be achieved without doing unnecessary studies in children, because that is also not enough studies in children, but also we do not want unnecessary studies in children, and without delaying the marketing authorization for adults, of course. Now, the key principle that SMEs have to remember is that pediatric development is now mandatory in the European Union as a principle, unless a waiver is granted by this agency, by the pediatric committee of this agency. And of course, it is possible also to grant a deferral for the development. So it's not necessarily the case that the development in children has to be at the same time as that in adults, as deferrals are granted, in fact, in more than 80% of the cases for new products, meaning that the completion of the studies in children can occur after the company comes for marketing authorization in adults. However, a deferral is deferral for doing the studies, not for agreeing them with the agency. We'll come to that a bit later. Now, the pillars of the pediatric regulation are reported here. Basically, it is a system of both obligations and rewards, stick and carrot. There's a pediatric committee at the agency that analyzes all the requests for PIPs and waivers, similar to the COMP. The pediatric investigation plan is the list of the measures and studies that are needed to ensure the safe and effective use of medicines in children. And then the regulation has a number of other measures, including transparency and information measures, that I will briefly mention afterwards. Now, this table here reports the different obligations and incentives that apply to different types of medicinal products. It's a bit technical here. For example, note that it mentions new medicinal product, which is not the same as new active substance. It mentions medicines that are already authorized but have a valid patent, and those that do not have a patent. And finally, orphan medicines are a specific category here. Now, the obligation is, in general, the pediatric investigation plan, excluding off-patent medicines that do not have this, off-patent and authorized medicines that do not have this obligation. The incentives are different. For orphans, Jordi has mentioned, it's an extension of 2 years of market exclusivity. For non-orphan medicinal products, the main incentive is the 6-month extension of the supplementary protection certificate. In other words, the patent that covers the product. Now, the pediatric regulation in Europe was made after similar regulations had already been adopted in the United States for a few years. So we had the advantage of taking into consideration the experience acquired in the United States. And in this table, you have a comparison of the different regulations. They try to achieve the same objectives, of course, but due to the highly different legislatory conditions in the two areas, they do have some differences. And I would say that my personal feeling is that both the carrot and the stick are a bit larger in Europe than they are in the US. And I say this about the carrot because the market exclusivity in Europe can be granted always, whereas in the US it's only for the BPCA procedure, whereas the mandatory scope of PRIA does not have an extension of the patent or similar reward. The stick is also a bit larger in Europe, because orphan drugs in Europe are not exempted from the obligations of the pediatric regulation, whereas in the US this is the case, and that is an important difference. Now, what is a pediatric investigation plan? It's a research and development program, and I read exactly from the pediatric regulation, that is aimed at ensuring that the data generated to determine the conditions in which a medicinal product may be authorized to treat the pediatric population. In practice, what is going to be needed in a pediatric investigation plan are the measures needed to acquire data on the efficacy, the safety, and the age-appropriate formulation for the medicinal product. The plan has to include timelines for both the start and the completion of each study, and you will have to discuss in the plan each condition, indication, and formulation for each pediatric subset, not necessarily age groups. Now, it is possible to have more than one pediatric investigation plan for the same medicinal product, for example, for different conditions. More about that later. Now, what is the agency doing to enable small and medium enterprises to agree PIPs, pediatric investigation plans, and waivers smoothly? What can the EMA do for you? So where can you find information on already existing PIP and waiver decisions and on existing pediatric data? Just like as Jordi has shown you for the orphans, it's all on the website. It may not be always easy to find the information, but I can assure you it's there. For example, this is a web page that contains all the decisions of the agency on the pediatric investigation plans, and you can search by condition, for example, or therapeutic area to see what the PDCO has agreed in the past in terms of pediatric development for other products. And there is now a considerable experience in many therapeutic areas, so you may be able to get ideas from there. Our plan, additionally, is from this year to include the key elements of each trial, a short summary of the protocol that has been agreed for the clinical trial and the non-clinical development. Another resource you may use to develop your PIP application is to use this database of all the pediatric trials that have been performed before 2008 and not otherwise submitted to regulatory authorities on authorized medicinal products. This is the so-called Article 45 pediatric database, and it currently includes the results of more than 3,200 studies done with authorized medicinal products, and we have about 3,000 more waiting to be published. Of course, the pediatric clinical trials are now included in the EU CTR, the Clinical Trial Register. That's the European equivalent of clinicaltrials.gov. It now contains the protocols, but the results of the pediatric studies will be added to the register, hopefully in Q4 2013. You can also access a WHO portal that allows you to do searches on clinical trials in both UCTR and clinicaltrials.gov at the same time. Another resource for companies is the proceedings from the expert groups on development of pediatric medicines that are periodically held at the agency, and we have about more than 20 now. This is the web page. You find the links here on the top to go directly to the relevant web page. These expert groups, of course, are not binding for the PDCO, but in general they provide guidance for the PIP development. Another resource for companies is the European Network of Pediatric Research at the EMA and PRIMA. This is a network of networks, including extra European Union networks as well, and it is built to stimulate quality research in the European Union on pediatric medicines. They have an annual workshop in which industry is also invited, and they can help industry in conducting the pediatric investigation plans. I would like to stress the possibility that companies have to do a pre-submission meeting at the agency, not only for orphan designations, but also for pediatric investigation plan and waivers. Sometimes we have even done joint pre-submission meetings with orphan drugs, and in any case, for all the pre-submission meetings for orphan drugs, the pediatric medicine section is involved, and we do check the application to try to anticipate any possible difficulties that may arise with these two procedures. The scope of the pre-submission meeting is to facilitate the validation and to make the procedure smoother. Now, I don't have statistics, as Jordi showed, on the efficacy of the pre-submission meeting, but the feeling is that it does improve the validation and the smoothness of the procedure. So an ultra-short course now on how to prepare a PIP application. What have we done to try to simplify life to applicants? Now, there is no doubt that a PIP application is a bit more complex than an orphan application. The timeline is longer, there is a clock stop, and I haven't put here in the slides on purpose the procedure because it has been presented in many meetings, many times. It's available on the agency website. So I will just mention a few points here. First of all, what do? You read the basics and do your homework. Pediatric regulation, the guideline of the Commission, and the procedural advice written by this agency are all available in the website and are the first three documents that everyone considering an application should read. All the templates and the deadlines are, of course, available on the website. We have specific documents on the pediatric use marketing authorizations, the PUMAs, and on the procedure for compliance check. And we have recently published, in 2012, additional guidance on defining the scope of the PIP, which is otherwise known as the condition versus indication issue, and another one on changing the scope of PIP decisions, otherwise known as merging and splitting PIP decisions, but it's not as simple as that. So when preparing the PIP, the pediatric investigation plan, or the waiver request, these are, I believe, the 6 core questions that should be addressed by the applicants. And I don't think I will go through them because they are pretty standard, but don't forget the formulation, which is sometimes neglected in the application, and think carefully about the deferral. Now, these 2 new policies, I've been asked to present at this meeting new developments, and in fact, this is not really a new development, meaning the policy has been published, but it's not that the thinking of the PDCO has changed. The concepts in this policy have always been applied by the Pediatric Committee. They have just been made systematic and put into writing to help companies to predict what the PDCO may think or will request in the request for modification at day 60. Now, the question here is how do we identify the condition for potential pediatric development starting from the proposed indication in adults? Well, the indication in adults is the starting point, of course, and that has been confirmed in a recent court case, but it's not the only limitation because the characteristics of the product, that is, its mechanism of action, has to be taken into consideration to define a possible pediatric use for the product. And to identify this, a hierarchical classification system of disease and conditions has been used by the agency, which is the MedDRA, quite familiar, I believe, to many of you. Now, the MedDRA has a hierarchical structure, and you see here that in most cases, the preferred term corresponds to an indication, and the high-level term corresponds more or less to a condition for potential pediatric use. Now, how does it work? Well, the applicant might propose in adults an indication C, which is a preferred term. Now, the PDCO will examine the condition, the high-level term corresponding to this indication, and will try to find if under this high-level term there is an indication which is of interest in children, which may not necessarily be the same identical proposed indication in adults. For example, in this case, the PDCO or the applicant from the beginning may identify that indication F and not C is the best indication in children. Once this is determined, the PDCO will never ask applicants to develop in more than one indication under the HLT that has been identified to apply using the mechanism of action. And the PIP opinion will therefore cover the HLT, so the condition, and all the PTs, the principal terms that are below the HLT, without the need for specific waiver for the individual PTs under it. I know it's complicated. That would deserve probably presentation of its own. It seems complicated, but in practice it is not, and the discussion is clear in the summary report, which is submitted to the applicant at the end of day 30. This is the structure of the PIP application, and I mention it here because we have changed recently the bottom element. It's called the key elements form. It was called the studies form before, but it has been simplified, and it now is supposed to contain the proposal of the applicant on what will be the key elements of the agreed PIP in the opinion and then the decision of the agency. So what has changed? Well, we are requesting applicants to put the study synopsis or the outlines in the PIP application in the scientific document for all studies that are of pediatric relevance, including, of course, the deferred studies. We don't necessarily need a complete study protocol, but a synopsis or outline has to be there. Now, from February this year, we are requesting applicants to put these synopses and outlines in the scientific documents, the parts B to E of the application. And for this scientific document, we have developed a new template that contains guidance, specifically aimed, in fact, at companies that are not familiar with the process. On the other hand, the proposed key elements for the opinion will have to go in this PDF form, which has replaced the studies form. Here, I show you the new template for scientific document, parts B to E. The guidance is the green text, You can see it here. There are no template tables for the quality, non-clinical, and clinical studies, and the applicant can use any format. But we have included 2 new templates for modeling and simulation studies and for extrapolation studies, which have become an important part in many PIP opinions. Now, this is the new key elements form, used to be called studies form. Again, I repeat, here the applicants should list what their proposal is for the key elements of the opinion, which the pediatric committee will use in the preparation of the draft opinion. This is how a clinical measure will look like. It's quite simple. There aren't many fields, as you can see, and if you hover over any field, you'll see some specific guidance popping up to tell you how that field should be filled. This is also new. This is the simplified template for the opinion in the PDCO. It contains only 13 fields, as you see, and it has been reduced from the previous one that was used until December 2012. And unfortunately here, I have to say that the website still reports the old version, and we're in the process of changing it. Actually, it should already have been changed by today, but it has not. I've checked yesterday. But anyway, the template there is only for information. The PDCO has been using the new template since December 2012. Now, the second policy that has been published recently is about changing the scope of the PIP. As I said, it is possible to have more than 1 PIP per medicinal product for different conditions, for example. But this has led to the need, in some cases, to merge the PIP decisions to comply with the wording of Article 7 and 8 of the Paediatric Regulation. In practice, if you have 2 PIP decisions for 2 different conditions, but then you're coming for marketing authorization of both conditions together for adults, you need to merge the decisions. You need a single decision to cover everything, not 2 separate ones. So in some situations, there may be a regulatory need, an obligation to merge the PIP decisions. Of course, if you only have 1 PIP, that is not a problem. In other situations, but this is always optional, never compulsory, the companies may benefit from splitting PIP decisions. If there is a PIP covering 2 separate conditions, but the development is not simultaneous, it may pay under certain circumstances to split the PIP decisions, to have 1 separate decision per condition, because that may allow an earlier reward. So you may obtain the reward plus 6 months of SPC extension earlier by splitting the PIPs. And this may be quite critical if the patent protection is about to expire, because the request has to be made 2 years in advance, as you know. Now, in practice, this is done through a procedure of modification of the agreed PIP in both cases. I will skip this, 5 minutes, okay. So if you want to do one of these 2 procedures, my advice is contact us in advance, and we'll agree everything. I will skip that one too and go straight to the conclusion, because I don't have much time, I'm told. So the principle that we're following is this: everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. There is unfortunately a limit, which is in the legislation. And I think that the take-home message from this presentation of mine are 3. The first is everything in the web. Everything is in the web, so you should be able to find all that you need. But if you're still confused, you're welcome to call or write to your pediatric coordinator if you already have one, or to write to the general pediatric mailbox, which is Pediatrics, EMA, Europa, EU, and then your question will be assigned. And we're normally pretty quick in answering them in very reasonable times, I have to say. And the third message is, please do use the pre-submission meeting, because we can improve significantly the smoothness of the procedure through the pre-submission meeting. This was a request from industry when we began, and we didn't have the resources to do it. Now we have them, luckily, and therefore I encourage particularly SMEs to go through this procedure that we can have, as I said, as a joint procedure. It's, of course, a teleconference, I'm reminded by Agnes, in most cases, so there is very little cost involved with it. Thank you.